Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. Welcome. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre will try and bring down the government next week with a non-confidence motion. He will explain why. A video of NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has gone viral after he got into a verbal confrontation with a heckler on Parliament Hill. And the Alberta government is investing $8.6 billion towards creating new schools here in the province. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says he will ask the other opposition parties to bring down the minority Liberal government with a non-confidence motion. The motion is expected to say that the House has no confidence in Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his government.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, they've doubled the debt, doubled housing costs, caused the worst inflation in 40 years, sent 2 million people to the food bank, unleashed crime and chaos in our communities. That's why it's time to put forward a motion for a carbon tax election. A carbon tax election needed because the NDP Liberals plan to hike the carbon tax by 300%, all the way to 61 cents a litre, which would cripple our economy, put hundreds of thousands of people out of jobs, mean empty shelves at grocery stores. We need a carbon tax election so Canadians can vote to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime with a common sense Conservative government.
Now, it's unclear if the NDP or Bloc will vote on the motion next week, but the Tories would likely need the support of both in order for the motion to pass. Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh made headlines today after he got into a verbal confrontation with a heckler on Parliament Hill. This is how it went down.
Would you vote a non-confidence tonight if it came up? Corrupted bastard. Want to say something? What? Want to say something? You say nothing? What does it mean? You got something to say?
I didn't say corrupted bastard, but I
said... Is that what you said?
No, I did not say that.
Who said it?
Somebody behind me said that.
Was it me? Was it you? No. You sure? If it was me, I'd admit it, buddy. Was it you or not? If it was me, I'd admit it. What'd you say then? I didn't say nothing. It wasn't me. It was a gentleman behind me, I guess. Who is it then? Point it out. I have no idea who it was, buddy. My word. You sure it's not you? No. 100%. You're a coward. You're not going to say it to my face. That's what's up. Say what? If I said something like that to you, I'd admit it. All right.
Alberta Premier Daniel Smith announced that $8.6 billion will be going towards building more schools and creating around 200,000 new spaces for students over the next 7 years. A question was asked if there was also extra funding to hire more teachers.
We did announce some additional operational funding over the summer. So we have funding for more modulars, but we also have funding to be able to manage growth pressures. And we're working now on identifying if we need to modify our funding model. The funding model was working for us when we had declining enrollment, declining population, and it works for declining school boards because it's a 3-year weighted average, and it's to protect school boards so that they don't end up with a dramatic reduction. With this huge surge, it's not as responsive as we need it to be for enrollment growth. So the minister is going through the Treasury Board process and working on an alternative model. Did you want to say more about that? I don't think we've got an answer yet, but how much did we put in for the short-term measure to help with hiring? $125 million we announced a few weeks ago to be able to help with this school year, but there'll be more to say in the upcoming budget, which will be delivered in February.
According to our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson, the $8.6 billion investment will be one of the largest infrastructure plans in Alberta's history. Dawson says the massive investment will be financed by loans.
That $8.6 billion it's going to be over 7 years, so it's not like this expenditure is sort of all going to come at one point, but it does seem to be financed by loans. And the other thing that's going to happen here, which is actually a bit of a change from the way the province normally builds schools, is that the province is going to retain ownership of the schools and lease them to school boards instead of dispersing grants to school boards to build schools. The benefit of this seems to be that you could approve and build projects sort of over the course of the year without requiring, annual budget writing, the annual budget season being the time when this money goes out. So it might sort of make this process flow a little more easily over the course of a given year.
Tyler Dawson also got his hands on an early version of potential policy resolutions to be discussed at the UCB convention in November. He'll have some of the highlights for us coming up after business news. Following Premier Smith's announcement, excitement is building in the Lethbridge School District as they await construction on new schools in the area, including the West Cooley Elementary School, currently under construction in the west side of the city. However, there's anticipation for more. BCN's Landon Hickok has the story.
The Lethbridge School Division say they are pleased on Danielle Smith's announcement on Tuesday night. As the West Cooley Elementary School is expected to open next fall, plans for expansion are well underway.
We're very pleased to hear the announcement because we know this is a significant investment of capital funding by the province in schools and new school spaces, and so we're excited to hear the announcement. Our number one priority is the modernization of Galbraith Elementary School in North Lethbridge, which is currently in design funding. When we look at the Premier's announcement, when design is ready, according to their announcement, that they will fast track the approval of construction on that, and of course we have yet to have that confirmed. With the announcement, we also have an increased need for new schools in West Lethbridge. West Lethbridge is the fastest growing area of the city of Lethbridge, and so we need a new high school in West Lethbridge as well as a new elementary in the south end.
West Cooley Elementary School is expected to bring in 600 students when it's completed, with room to grow as much as 900. Nevertheless, much planning still needs to be finalized, and a study will be sent to Alberta Education to approve the need for new schools to be built.
West Cooley Station Elementary School will be alleviating a pressure out of our elementary school in North Lethbridge, Mike Mountain Horse Elementary School. And so this is welcome news and needed right away, and so it'll open in September 2025.
To relieve pressure, the district has been using modular classrooms to compensate for the number of students.
We're hoping in budget 2025 that we'll receive planning funds for those two projects, because one of the biggest, I guess, hurdles or requirements that we do need to accomplish before we can go any further is that we need to find a site and start the process to develop that site so it's ready.
For Bridge City News, I'm Landon Hickok.
The Alberta Teachers Association, meanwhile, says it's been advocating for years on school capacity, and although new schools are a good measure, this funding by the province fails to address staffing issues within these new schools.
When I talk to my colleagues across the province, they're, people who've been teaching 10, 20 years, they've never seen class sizes as large as they're seeing right now. They're seeing students come with really complex needs, and they don't have educational assistance support for them. So for instance, I talked to a colleague of mine who has students who are in grade 1 who aren't toilet trained yet, and they don't have an assistant. We have colleagues who are doing literacy and numeracy tests right now in 1 to 3. They're losing up to 90 hours of instructional time doing these tests. We have colleagues who are talking about the fact that they don't have supports for special needs students. They don't have Chromebooks. They don't have resources for the new curriculum, and they're burning out and choosing to leave the profession now. So what is this going to look like 3 years from now when we have all of these new schools coming online, but you don't have people who are willing to work in them because the government is failing to address the needs that we have in our schools today?
ATA President Jason Schilling also says Alberta education is the least funded in all of Canada. The City of Calgary officially voted to dissolve the Green Line LRT project on Tuesday. Closing the initiative, however, will cost the city an extra $850 million on top of the expenditure costs from building the project. In total, the city will owe $2.1 billion. The city will aim to transfer the costs and liability to the province after the province decided to withhold funding when cost overruns of the first phase of only 9 kilometers budgeted to over $6 billion. Transportation Minister Devin Tereshan was the one who sent the letter of intent to City Council to pull the funding. He says the current alignment put forward by Calgary City Council was an irresponsible waste of taxpayer money.
We gave 3 conditions to Calgary Council on a green line that would actually work for the city. And it was tying into the red and blue line downtown, going to the new event center, which essentially will be the new Saddle Dome, and then stretching as far to the southeast into the suburbs as possible, and hopefully to the community of Shepherd and beyond. But unfortunately, the city came back with an alignment that only met 2 out of those 3 conditions. And so that's why we set our $1.53 billion of provincial money into the Green Line. It's not going to go with that alignment. And we have now contracted out an engineering firm that will actually have a new alignment that we will share with the city in December that actually does stretch out to the southeast part of Calgary and just ultimately serve more Calgarians on this new Green Line.
That was Alberta Transportation Minister Devin Dreeshen joining us from his riding in central Alberta. Well, we saw more clouds and light showers in parts of southwestern Alberta again today. Jeanette Roche is now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, it might be kind of hit and miss when it comes to moisture in our region over the next few days.
Yeah, that's true. We're seeing showers, then sunshine, then clouds, then more sunshine. It seems that it doesn't know what it wants to do, can't make up its mind. Although we are seeing temperatures higher than seasonal these last few days of fall that we're in here right now. Now today we didn't quite reach that original forecast of 22 degrees, more like just hovering under 20. And then this evening we're seeing an overnight low of 7 degrees, could see 30 to 50K winds as well. Now as we get into Thursday, we're going to be seeing sun and cloud in the morning and then clearing for nice blue sky tomorrow. Lots of sunshine, and there's that high of 22. Now, here's some news for you. As we get closer to the weekend, we're going to see those temperatures drop and some more rainfall. And I'll be back later in the show to give you all those details, as well as the national forecast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Multiple explosions went off on Wednesday at the site of a funeral for 3 Hezbollah members and a child who were killed by exploding pagers the day before. In total, the electronic devices killed more than 12 people in Lebanon and left more than 2,800 injured. There are reports that it was an apparent Israeli operation targeting the terrorist group Hezbollah. Officials with the Lebanese Ministry of Health say several walkie-talkies also exploded in Lebanon, killing 9 and injuring more than 300 others. According to Joseph Fetterman of the Associated Press, Israel has not officially claimed responsibility for the pager explosion attacks, but they are the prime suspect.
The targets all appear to have been connected to the Hezbollah militant group. No one has claimed responsibility, but Lebanon is accusing Israel. American officials say that Israel notified them of this. Israel is the obvious suspect here. Israel and Lebanon have been fighting for almost a year now, cross-border fighting almost every day. And in recent weeks, Israel has sent a number of signals that its patience was running out. This fighting has displaced tens of thousands of Israelis from their homes in northern Israel, also on the Lebanese side. But Israeli officials have made it clear that their patience is running out, so there is strong evidence that Israel is somehow connected to this incident.
New details are being released as to the horrific conditions hostages were subjected to at the hands of the terrorist group Hamas in the Gaza Strip. According to TBN Israel correspondent Yair Pinto, many were brutally tortured before they were murdered.
Here's Goldberg Polin, one of the most recognizable faces of the heart-reckoning hostage crisis in the Hamas-Israel war, has died at the hand of his captors. After enduring nearly 11 months of abuse, torture, and starvation in Hamas captivity, he was among 6 hostages that were brutally murdered just before being discovered by the IDF in an underground tunnel hidden deep within a Hamas stronghold in Rafah. A weary and grief-stricken nation now faces the daunting question of how to move forward against an uncompromising enemy, and at what cost these critical decisions will come.
You know, if we focus on the chaos here in the world, it can overwhelm and sometimes cause fear to overtake us. However, if we anchor ourselves to the truth of who God says He is, we can live free from fear. Grace Fox, author of Names of God, Living Unafraid, describes a number of names that God goes by in Scripture, one being Yahweh.
Well, that's the name that He identified Himself by when He met Moses at the burning bush. He said, I am Yahweh, and this is a name by which I want to be known for all generations. And that name actually means, well, for one, He is the creator of the universe. He is in charge of things, but He is in desire of a relationship with us. So He is self-sufficient, which means He doesn't depend on anything for His existence. He is self-existence, which means He always has been, He always will be. But this whole thing about him wanting relationship with us. That is what that name conveys.
Make sure you catch the entire interview with Grace Fox, author of Names of God, Living Unafraid, and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our broadcast. Ottawa is going to slash the number of international student visas by another 10%. Federal Immigration Minister Mark Miller says the new target for 2025 and 2026 will be 437,000 permits.
Taking a step back, international students and the postgraduate work permits that come with it occupy about 50% of the temporary workers that are here in Canada. The programs that Randy administers about 10-15%, depending how you're counting. So the growth in the international student space, along with the postgraduate work permits that come with them, the spousal permits that come with them, are ones where we owe it to Canadians, and in the context of an economy where the labour market in some areas is constricting, we need to adjust accordingly.
Miller adds that the federal government will also be putting new limits on work permits for spouses of foreign workers and students in master's degree programs. Lethbridge City Council received an update on the city's encampment strategy on Tuesday. From mid-June to August 26th, the encampment response team experienced a 27% increase in reported encampments from the same period last year. General Manager of Community Social Development, Andrew Malcolm, says overall the initiative has been a great success.
We recognize that many people, not all, but many people in these situations didn't choose to be in these situations, and they're looking for support. So first of all, we're offering supports through our outreach and through connected service providers. The second piece is that when we do approach them and they are ultimately being moved along and their stuff is being taken down, that we do it in a consistent way so that there's clear expectations and we remove a level of uncertainty, which is typically where behaviors get heightened and we have that additional risk factor. So we've had a great deal of success in compliance, but also overall safety with our team.
During the reporting period, 15 coordinated encampment cleanups were conducted with a total of 160 structures, and over 10,000 kilograms of debris was removed. Well, things are looking up somewhat for the folks with the Lethbridge and District exhibition, thanks to a very successful Whoop Up Days and a number of bookings at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center. The group's deficit has gone down. City officials say the LDE is projecting a $1.3 million improvement to the deficit for this fiscal year. It is now predicted to be $3.26 million. Acting CEO of the LDE, Kim Gallucci, continues to add bookings at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center, with 15 more events added to the schedule this year and 6 new events for 2025. The United Way in Lethbridge will be hosting their second ever Pull the Bus event coming up on Friday. Teams of 8 will pull a city bus across the street in a challenge of strength and endurance. It'll kick off their annual fundraising campaign this week.
Teams of 8 are going to get together and they're going to pull a city bus. And it's about 75 feet that they're going to pull, about 150 feet. And the city bus weighs about 24,000 pounds. It's a campaign that we are here to bring awareness about United Way and raise funds and have a great time. We raise money to help support human community resource investment in our community. And so we support about 9 different community agencies, charitable community agencies in our Lethbridge and Southwestern Alberta region. And so the money will help support the United Way work that we do. And that will include helping support the various agencies that we do fund.
Always looks like a good workout, pulling a bus. And the event starts Friday, 12 noon at the Lethbridge Canadian Tire South parking lot. While we saw more shower activity here in Lethbridge, it'll be hit and miss moisture-wise over the next few days. Full weather details are coming up. Well, it was cloudy and cool today in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, there were also rain clouds that we saw today. Will they be moving on anytime soon?
Well, they're moving out for now, but we can expect them back soon. In fact, as early as Friday, we should see those showers back again. 60% chance, and then that high of only 10 degrees on a Friday. So that's how we're starting our weekend after that beautiful 22-degree day on Thursday with clear skies. And then as we do get into the weekend, we are seeing clear skies again, but highs kind of hovering in the teens there. So we're going to be just scooting a little bit less than the seasonal high as we get into the weekend and next week, but still hovering within that range. So 16 Saturday, 19 Sunday, 17 for the high on Monday, up to 23 degrees though on Tuesday. So that's definitely getting us back up there outside of that range of the average high. So average high for this time of year, 19 degrees, 5 degrees for the average low. 35 was our record temperature on this day. That happened back in 1981. And in 2003, we had the chilliest on record, which was -3. 7:12 is when the sun rose this morning, and our sun set this evening at 7:36 p.m. So we're looking at 12 hours and 19 minutes of daylight. We are about 6 minutes shorter than we saw it yesterday. Okay, 17 for the high in Victoria tomorrow. Mainly clear skies. Could see some winds there, up to 40 winds, creating onshore winds, feeling like 13 degrees. 18 for the high in Vancouver. Seeing morning showers clearing up later on in the day. We've got a mix of sun and cloud in both Calgary and Edmonton, but then clearing up for lots of sunshine throughout the rest of the day. 18 for the high in Edmonton. 20 is the expected high tomorrow in Calgary. Now we're seeing rain mixed with risk of thunderstorms as we get into the rest of the prairies. So Saskatchewan could see rain in the morning, clearing up then, but that risk of morning thunder shower as well. 19 for the high there. 60% chance of showers in both Regina and Winnipeg with risk of thunderstorms. Regina seeing 60 winds as well. 17 the high there and 19 for the high in Winnipeg tomorrow. Seeing mainly clear skies as we get into Toronto. Humidex also of 30 with that high of 26. 28 the expected high tomorrow in Ottawa. Could see some mix of sun and cloud, fog dissipating in the morning. And then Montreal also a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 28. Low 30s for the humidex for all three of those cities. So it could feel a little bit sticky. Same thing in Fredericton, seeing the humidex hovering in the low 30s. 28 the expected high, 30% chance of showers there. Halifax seeing a mix of sun and cloud. 26 for the high, but more like 18 along the coast there. 22 for the high in Charlottetown with a mix of sun and cloud. Could see some fog dissipating there. Lots of rain expected in St. John's tomorrow, seeing 10 millimeters and up to 20 millimeters in the areas heaviest hit with that rain, high of 13 there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Alberta Energy Minister Brian Jean is opening consultations this fall on how to best deal with Alberta's nearly 500,000 oil and gas wells, 2/3 of which are not producing. Jean has suggested some form of public assistance may be needed to clean up the mess, despite the industry's legal obligations to do so. He also suggested municipalities may have to take a haircut on their tax levies and that the industry's regulatory burden may need to be tightened and lightened. But University of Calgary resource law professor Martin Olszynski says many energy companies are thriving and an industry-wide bailout would raise serious questions. Ratifying the current tentative deal between Air Canada and the Pilots Union will be challenging. Some experts believe struggles to increase entry-level pay could prevent union voters from accepting it. Under the current deal, pilots earn far less in their first 4 years before getting a large wage increase in year number 5. Aviation management expert John Graddick says around 2,000 of the roughly 5,200 active pilots with Air Canada may earn entry-level wages after a recent hiring surge. He says while a strike may have been dodged, failures to improve pilot pay could prompt pushback from rank-and-file flight crews with the next union vote. Health Canada has removed brominated vegetable oil from its list of permitted food additives. Also known as brominated soybean oil, the food additive is typically found in soft drinks, especially those with citrus flavoring. It is used as a stabilizer for fruit flavoring to prevent it from floating to the top. A recent study showed that lab animals given BVO over time showed negative effects on their thyroid and hearts, and uncertainty in long-term human consumption of BVO pushed Health Canada to ban it. Companies have until August 30th of 2025 to remove BVO from all products, a move similar to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, which will remove all BVO from products by August 2nd of 2025. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 85 points on the day to finish at 23,592. The Dow was down 103 points to 41,503. The S&P 500 was down 16 on the day to 5618, and the NASDAQ was down 54 points to 17,573. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 28 cents to $70.91 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was down 4 cents to $2.28 U.S. Gold was up 29 cents to $25.59.17 US an ounce, and silver was up a cent to $30.07 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $7.81 per bushel, barley's at $6.14, canola's at $13.22, and corn is at $7.39 per bushel. Live cattle October contract was down $1.30 to $183.15. Feeder cattle were down 48 cents to $242.83, and lean hogs October contract was up 28 cents to $82.05. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.70 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Alberta Premier Daniel Smith announced that $8.6 billion will be going towards building more schools and creating around 200,000 new spaces for students over the next 7 years. This will be one of the largest infrastructure projects in Alberta's history. Well, our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have more on that huge infrastructure project coming up momentarily. He'll also discuss how Alberta and British Columbia are in alignment when it comes to involuntary addictions treatment to battle the ongoing opioid crisis in both provinces. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. Premier Daniel Smith announced $8.6 billion aimed at building more schools and creating around 200,000 new spaces for students over the next 7 years. Now, to chat about this huge initiative in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, this is one of the largest infrastructure plans in Alberta history, and the plan will apparently be financed by taking on loans?
Yeah, so that's maybe the part that people might be less enthused about, let's say. I don't think anyone is particularly opposed to building more schools. I think it's fairly obvious at this point that schools are pretty overcrowded. And also this is not, a particularly new problem. I remember more than 30 students per class when I was in elementary school 30 years ago. So this is not a particularly new problem, but this is the latest crack at solving it, shall we say. Now that $8.6 billion it's going to be over 7 years, so it's not like this expenditure is sort of all going to come at one point, but it does seem to be financed by loans. And the other thing that's going to happen here, which is actually a bit of a change from the way the province normally builds schools, is that the province is going to retain ownership of the schools and lease them to school boards instead of dispersing grants to school boards to build schools. The benefit of this seems to be that you could approve and build projects sort of over the course of the year without requiring, annual budget writing, annual budget season being the time when this money goes out. So it might sort of make this process flow a little more easily over the course of a given year. Not going to be happening super soon. Obviously there are all sorts of things that need to happen before a school can be built. Land needs to be found, plans need to be drawn up, all that kind of stuff. And so school boards are supposed to be looking into that in the next little bit. But, a massive, massive expenditure, and the Premier took to television last night to lay that out before Albertans. I don't know, a Premier's address to the province isn't usually used for something like a spending announcement. So it was a bit of an interesting twist on the subjects that are normally brought up during those sorts of things. But anyways, massive spending, clearly a huge overhaul in parts of the education system, and I guess we'll see how it turns out. There's always a bit of trouble in terms of financing developments and things like that, so I'm sure people will be keeping a close eye on that.
Alberta and BC, Tyler, are now in an alignment on a major aspect of drug policy, and that would be involuntary addictions treatment. Now, it turns out that British Columbia may actually be providing some guidance to the Alberta government.
Well, it looks that way. So what has happened in the past week is that both John Rustad, the leader of the BC Conservatives, and David Eby, the Premier of British Columbia and the NDP leader, have both sort of backed this idea of involuntary drug treatment. And this is not the first time BC has sort of flirted with this idea. In 2020, John Horgan, the former BC Premier, had brought forth legislation that would have allowed the involuntary treatment of minors. That died actually in 2021 when an election was called, and it hasn't really come back. And Eby in particular sort of waffled on it over the years. But what we do have now is alignment between the Conservatives and the NDP in BC, which is very strange, you might think, on something like this. this. But what EB proposed last week is a relatively clear policy. I mean, I think there's some wiggle room there and up for debate parts of it, but relatively clear. And what he said was that those who are suffering from mental illness, severe drug addiction, and brain injury are going to be the people sort of captured by this possibility of being involuntarily confined to a secure facility for treatment. We have not heard that sort of precision in Alberta, I don't think. We've talked about, people who are a threat to themselves and to others, people with severe drug addiction who should be forced into treatment. But those three things, the brain injury, the addiction, and the mental health, it has not as yet been as much a component of what Alberta is considering. And of course, this was proposed back in 2023 during the election, and there hasn't been legislation yet. It's still in consultation and figuring it out sort of phases, as far as I know. But kind of interesting to see where BC is at and where Alberta's at. And of course, BC has an election in, I think, 4 or so weeks. So this is doubtless going to be a major topic on the campaign trail over there, and it'll be worth watching from an Alberta perspective, because we might be keeping an eye on them for coming up with some ideas about what to do.
Absolutely. Last week, news broke that the Trudeau government was looking over a plan to share asylum seekers among all the provinces, Tyler. The majority would allegedly be heading to Ontario and Quebec, but there was talk of 28,000 coming to Alberta. But Premier Smith said, hey, we simply don't have the capacity right now to bring in that many more people. I mean, we already have seen a population increase here in Alberta of 200,000 since last year. I guess maybe the Alberta is Calling campaign really worked out?
Well, depending on what one wanted as the outcome, it's worked out. There's certainly been a lot of people coming to Alberta, and perhaps too many people, at least from the perspective of the government. But back in July, all the premiers had they call it the Council of the Federation, when all the premiers meet and they talk about issues facing the premiers. Usually they ask for things like more money for healthcare, and I think they did again this year. But one of the things they asked for was a more equitable and fair distribution of asylum seekers. There's more than 200,000, I think about 230,000 asylum seekers currently in Canada. So these are people that are in the early stages of the refugee application process, and they apply when they come here, and they're sort of in a bit of a limbo until their asylum requests are rejected or accepted. Now, most of them are currently in BC and Ontario, in Quebec and Ontario, I should say, which sort of makes sense. Montreal and Toronto have two of the biggest airports in the country. It just sort of makes sense. But the federal government has been sort of talking with some of the premiers about what a more fair distribution of these people might look like. And Quebec in particular has asked the federal government to send asylum seekers elsewhere. So if that sort of idea was adopted, if asylum seekers were distributed on a per capita basis, then every province except for Quebec and Ontario would get more asylum seekers. You'd lose about 15 to 20,000 from those two provinces, and other provinces would gain a bunch more. Obviously, this has been really controversial. New Brunswick has spoken out against it. Alberta's spoken out against it, basically saying that look at the state of our public services. I mean, we just talked about schools being overcrowded and needing billions of dollars in investment. Similar situation with healthcare. And obviously, housing is becoming a bit of an issue in parts of Alberta as well. So super controversial. It doesn't seem like this is, going ahead immediately. There does seem to be a lot of back and forth between the federal government and the provinces, but something to keep an eye on, because the population growth in Alberta is obviously significant and creating some challenges for the province as well.
Do we know where the bulk of these asylum seekers are originating from? Is it Ukraine, maybe the Gaza Strip? What do we know so far?
Well, they do seem to come from a bunch of places. Now, there was the sort of big crush of Ukrainian refugees that came at a certain point, and a lot of those ended up in Alberta, actually, which sort of makes sense because there's a lot of historical ties to Ukraine in Alberta. I think we have the largest Ukrainian population in the country, so it does make sense that a lot of those people came here with some connection. There would be data on where everybody had come from. I believe a lot are coming from South America at this point. But I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the exact breakdown was.
Tyler, the UCP will be holding its annual convention on November the 1st and 2nd, I believe. Now, you actually got your hands on an early version of potential policy resolutions that may be discussed. What really jumped out for you?
Well, a few things really jumped out. This is the sort of unedited list, shall we say. It was really, really long, like maybe 50 or 60 different resolutions. And what happened was they all went out to the party's members 2 weeks ago, and members had 2 weeks to rank what they thought were the most important, their top priorities. And then the party sort of takes the top ranked ones and they end up for public debate at the convention in a month and a half here. So it's a bit of a Wild West as a result. And the ones that jumped out at me were, the big one actually that really jumped out at me was the suggestion that Alberta should get strong mayor legislation like Ontario. As it is in every city and town in Alberta, the mayor is just sort of one vote on the council. Of course, they have a little bit of authority, but it's really the bully pulpit. Their vote counts for no more than any other councillor. Strong mayor legislation would change that to some extent. It would give the mayor some veto powers, for example. It could give the mayors more direct budget-making power as opposed to a committee writing budgets, things like that. So that one, if that's adopted, that could have some pretty significant changes, or effects, I should say, on the way that municipal government works in the province. And then there were some other sort of social issues, shall we say, that caught my eye. Because what's always interesting, I think, with conservative parties is the extent that social conservatives, successfully bring their issues up and have them incorporated into policy. If we look at the Stephen Harper years, that's the perfect example of social conservatives not really getting very far, despite working pretty hard at it. And times have maybe shifted a little bit. So there are some new policies around female-only spaces, for example, in bathrooms and change rooms, things like that. These are not wildly different from policy that's already been adopted. There is one resolution that would seek to not fund third trimester abortions, which are very rare as it is in Alberta. But you can imagine that the NDP will be quite worked up about that. And the same thing with private healthcare. There's a resolution that says that Albertans should be able to seek private surgical procedures if there's too many delays in the public system. Again, this is the sort of thing the NDP loves to fight about, even if it's maybe not that controversial of a proposal for a lot of people. So it's really interesting just seeing where the constituency associations around the province started. What things did they think were the most important issues facing Alberta? And then we'll see in a couple weeks here when the final list comes out, what did the party's membership overall think was important? And that will lead to the debate at the convention. So it's a bit of a how the sausage is made kind of process, but pretty interesting nonetheless.
Tyler, our province's Energy Minister Brian Jean has discussed the potential that oil and gas companies may need public money to clean up orphan wells. Now, that could be quite the tab in the tens of billions or even hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah, this is always really controversial when it comes up. And the reason for that is oil and gas producers are legally obligated to reclaim their used up wells. They don't really get to just leave them and walk away. But there are hundreds of them, thousands of them around the province, and the total cost to clean them all up, the estimates are massive. I think they range from about 50 or 60 billion to 350 billion, something like that. And they haven't really, the number of them has been reduced in recent years, but it is a very, very slow process. And so what Brian Jean was saying is, look, if this needs to get done, maybe we need to find some way to make it easier for the oil and gas sector. Maybe there needs to be reductions in their municipal tax rate. Maybe there needs to be the lightening of some regulatory burdens so that they get this done. Of course, rural municipalities are furious about this. They're saying, well, why should we cut their taxes when they're not fulfilling their legal obligations to clean these things up? So hard to say exactly where that's going to go. There are a couple sort of similar policy programs out there already that have been controversial. But any further travel down this road, shall we say, is, I think, going to be very, very controversial, because I think the populist instincts of Albertans are maybe opposed to giving taxpayer money to big business to clean up after themselves.
Now, speaking of controversies, let's chat a bit about Alberta pulling out of the CPP. Now, talk of Alberta pulling out of the Canada Pension Plan and walking away with around $300 billion has kind of been put on ice for now. Can you explain why?
Yeah, so back when this first came up, the provincial government got a report that said they would be entitled to, I think the specific number is $343 billion, but it's more than half of the entire CPP's assets, is what this report concluded that Alberta was due if it pulled out to start its own pension plan. And the government really trumpeted that. They said, look at all this money, look at all the benefits that Albertans could have. We could pay out more to retirees, working Albertans would have to contribute less. It's a win-win for everybody. This was obviously really controversial. And the Alberta government doesn't really just get to walk away with that money without a little bit of negotiation with the federal government and other provinces. And so where it is at currently is the provincial government is waiting on Ottawa's sort of return estimate. If Alberta says, we think we get 343, 334 billion, whatever it was, well, what is the federal government going to say? Are they going to say 100 billion? Are they going to say 50 billion? Are they going to say 250? We just don't know. And so the process is just sort of paused until we find out what the federal government is going to say. Because obviously, if it's significantly less, if all of the benefits of having more than 300 billion wouldn't be there because that number is smaller, there's a good chance that plan gets scrapped. If that number is also humongous, then maybe the plan goes forward. So we're just sort of waiting on that. And then I would expect that to flare up again at some point in the next couple months here. And once we have that number.
Here in Lethbridge, Tyler, the Alberta NDP chose their candidate for the Lethbridge West by-election. It became available when Shannon Phillips stepped away from public life back in July. Now, former City Councillor Rob Miyashiro is the new candidate, and the UCP will be choosing its candidate next Monday, and the frontrunner so far is former Lethbridge Police Chief and current City Councillor John Middleton Hope. Interesting times ahead here in our city, and this is a riding that both the UCP and NDP will be pushing for.
Yeah, very much a battleground riding, and very much a riding that people are going to be watching quite closely to see sort of where the political winds are blowing in Alberta right now. This is going to be a big test, I think, for Naheed Nenshie's for his NDP. You know, this was an NDP riding for, I think, since 2015 when Shannon Phillips first won it. And obviously something that the NDP wants to hang on to, and something that Nenshie wants to hang on to, so he can say, look, I can still win elections. So I guess we'll see what happens when the UCP picks their candidate next Monday, I believe that is, and then we're off to the races. Of course, well, I shouldn't say that. We're actually not off to the races because the provincial government hasn't given us a by-election date yet. It has to happen by January 1st, 2025, because Shannon Phillips resigned, I think it was on Canada Day, and there's a 6-month window they have to hold it. So all this has sort of been happening without, an actual election date being called, which is sort of strange, I suppose. But I would imagine we see that in October and November. No one wants a Christmas election, so that just seems logical.
And NDP leader Nenshie announced his lineup for when the legislature returns, Tyler. Raki Pancholi and Christina Gray join Nenshie on the leadership team. Any surprises with the other appointees?
Yeah, one actually. Kathleen Ganley, she also ran for the NDP leadership and didn't get a critic position. She's going to be sort of chair of engagement on sort of an advisory panel. And the other leadership candidates did get critic portfolios. Sarah Hoffman, for example, is health critic. Jody Callahoo Stonehouse is, I think, the forestry and parks critic. So maybe a bit of a snub to Kathleen Ganley on that one, actually. And of course, Rachel Notley is the wild card here. She is going to be a advisor, basically, to the premier. To the party leader, and she's not the premier. And she is taking her seat in the legislature as far as we know. So that'll be something else to keep an eye on. Does Rachel Notley stick around even though she's no longer party leader, or does she decide to resign and retire?
He's our legislative reporter who sometimes does a Freudian slip, and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Thanks for joining us today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal. Thanks for having me.
What's in a name? In Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, the heroine questions the meaning of names and argues that Romeo would still be the same if he had a different name. So what's behind that? It turns out the Bible has a number of different names, different descriptive names even for God that gives us some clues. For instance, the Hebrew name for God, Yahweh, appears more than 6,000 times. But who is God and what kind of relationship does he want with us? Joining us from Richmond, BC, from a sailboat actually, to discuss this further is Grace Fox. She's a career missionary and Bible teacher at international women's events and co-hosts the podcast, Your Daily Bible Verse. She has written 14 books, the latest of which is The Names of God, Living Unafraid. Good to have you with us today, Grace. I just had to mention that you're on a sailboat right now.
Yeah, that's a fun thing to say. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Now, Grace, you say that writing this book, Living Unafraid, has actually grown your faith. How so?
Because I did a deep dive into 7 names of God and discovered how he really made his character manifest to us through those names. And so I think the way it affected me the most was realizing who it is I'm praying to. It's not just God, he's not just some nebulous force out there, but when I pray, praying in the name of, say, El Elyon, that's a name for God that tells me that he is the boss and he has the final say. And it just gives me greater confidence in approaching him and in expecting answers that are the best answers.
Interesting. Okay, and apparently, as I mentioned off the top there, the Hebrew name for God, Yahweh, appears more than 6,000 times in the Old Testament. So, what is he trying to tell us by using that name?
Well, that's the name that he identified himself by when he met Moses at the burning bush. He said, I am Yahweh, and this is the name by which I want to be known for all generations. And that name actually means, well, for one, he is the creator of the universe, he is in charge of things, but he is in desire of relationship with us. So he is self sufficient, which means he doesn't depend on anything for his existence. He is self existence, which means he always has been, he always will be. But this whole thing about him wanting relationship with us, that is what that name conveys. So again, he's not the creator God who put it all together and then stepped aside for us to figure it out. He created us for a purpose and wants to engage with us in this life.
Now, the Hebrew name Yahweh Shammah means the Lord is there. So, why do you think he uses this description of himself?
Well, that is an interesting name because it only appears a couple of times, and it's in the context of the Israelites were in exile and they were giving up hope because their beautiful city Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple was destroyed, and they were thinking we are never going to be able to go back to our homeland. And so he stepped in through the prophet to give that message to the people that yes, you will go back, you will return, and I will be there once again. Yahweh Shammah, I will be there. That's the context of that name. But we can look at that as at one point he dwelt in the temple, but now he says the followers of Jesus are called the temple of God. And so through the Holy Spirit, he lives in us. So he is with us. Yahweh Shammah, I am there. I am with you in that temple. And that is so encouraging because especially on those days that we feel all alone or we feel like this, life is getting really hard for us, we are not alone because Yahweh Shammah, he is there. He's there with us.
That's very comforting. Now, Grace, you write that fear is natural when God gives us an assignment. So, why do we often feel paralyzed by our fears or insecurities?
Oh, it is such a big deal for so many people. And even for me, every book I write, I struggle with that fear. And I just have to say, God, if you've given me this assignment, I know that you're going to help me get it done. And I think it's because there's that fear of failure. What if I don't get it right? Or that fear of inadequacy. This is too big for me. Those are very common fears. And, when God gives us an assignment, it's often bigger than we can do it in and of ourselves. And it's motivation then for us to do it in God's strength, not our own.
Now, I understand, Grace, that studying the names of God has turned your prayer life upside down.
Yeah, it is really focusing on those names. So I've run into struggles. Say, I know that there's been a difficult interpersonal relationship that I've been working through. And in that one, I have always felt like I don't need to defend myself. I don't need to defend myself against the things that this person is saying about me. And so just be quiet and just walk in love towards this person. And I have thought often of how El Elyon, God gets the final say. That's who I think of when I think about praying in relationship to that struggle that I'm having. Um, El Elyon is the one who has the final say. He's the one who's going to declare me innocent in this one. He's the one who's going to make it clear to this person that the assumptions that he's basing his thoughts about me on are not correct. I don't have to run after him. I don't have to try to twist his arm any other way. El Elyon is the one who has the final say, and I'm good with that.
So, Grace, how did your own legalistic upbringing influence the way you viewed God, and when did that begin to change?
Yeah, so there is another name of God that I discovered, and it just brought such freedom. So that would be Yahweh. I have to think about that. Sit Kenu, to say it right. Yahweh Sit Kenu. And that means He is our righteousness. And so I was brought up in a church going family, but it was like, wow, we're at church all the time, always involved in church activities. But you know what? That doesn't make us righteous. Obeying religious rules doesn't make us righteous in God's eyes. And so I think of the righteousness that we try to clothe ourselves in, or we try to cover up maybe the shame of something that's happened to us or something that we've done we don't want anybody to know about. That would be like an old dirty bathrobe, like that's stained and tattered, and it probably belongs in a dumpster somewhere. And so God comes along and He says, "Let me take that off you. You're my child. I don't want you to be clothed in something like that." And so He takes and He clothes us in the robe of righteousness that comes from Jesus dying on the cross for us and rising from the dead. He paid the penalty for our sin that we deserve, but he took it on Himself. And with that, He clothes us in His righteousness, and we don't have to bear that shame anymore.
Now, you say that you struggled with a sense of guilt and shame. Speaking of shame, there. So, is there a difference between those two?
Yeah, shame is something that we can put on ourselves too, and it's something that God's never intended for us to carry. In Psalms, there's a verse that says, "No shadow of shame will cover our faces," and I just love that. We just don't need to carry that. Guilt is also something we can put on ourselves, but in a sense, there's a good sense of that as well. It's when we do wrong and we do need to turn around, and the Holy Spirit can actually convict us of sin and of wrongdoing. And we might, name it guilt. We can call it that if we want. But when we have that sense of conviction that we've done something wrong, that's when we need to do something about it. But shame is just not something that God intends for us to carry, because Jesus took care of that.
Now, in 21st century terms, what does it mean that God refers to Himself as our shepherd?
Oh, I just love this one. There's so much comfort in that. And the Hebrew name would be Yahweh Roi. The Lord is my shepherd. And I love to walk people through that little phrase where I speak at different events. So it's like, the Lord. Lord is Yahweh, capitals, capital Lord. All of them are caps. So anytime you see that in the Bible, that's Yahweh. He is the one who is our shepherd. And wow, there's no better hands that we could be in, really. Is a present tense verb. So it's not that He was our shepherd, but He isn't anymore, or that He will be when we get our act together. He is our shepherd right now, this very moment. My indicates that relationship. And He is mine, I'm His. I belong to Him, and He belongs to me. And shepherd, oh, there's just a plethora of responsibilities that the shepherd takes for the sheep in his care. He assumes ultimate responsibility. And so I can trust Him. I can trust Him because He has assumed responsibility for me. The Lord is my shepherd. It's just so comforting.
Now, Grace, do you agree that many people's fresh revelations of God are often born out of some crisis or intense experience?
I absolutely agree with that, because most of the names of God that were revealed in Scripture were revealed during a time of crisis. And I don't know why it is that we often learn best in a place of suffering. Perhaps it's when life is going well, we think we can do it on our own. And that's just like the Israelites did back in the Old Testament. Life went well, they kind of forgot about God and they went their own way. But when God disciplined them and things started happening that were difficult in their lives, then they would finally come back and realize, wow, we can't do this on our own. We really do need God. And so those names of God became very real to the Israelites in a time of crisis. And I think the same is true for us today.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I can certainly relate to that. And I think that you can as well, Grace, because I think there were times in your life that you faced numerous situations when you had, no emergency fund or a way to cover basic needs, right? Have we become maybe too self-reliant that we don't believe we need his help?
I think we have, where we really rely on our own abilities, and we forget then that even the breath that we take is because God is the one who's provided the oxygen, and he's the one who enables our lungs to fill with air. If he wasn't overseeing every detail of our lives that way, we would cease to exist pretty quick. So we are fully dependent on him, and when we come to understand that, I think there's freedom in that, because then we realize we're not dependent on ourselves. We're finite beings. We don't have all the answers. We don't have all the strength we need to do life well, but he does. He's the source of everything as Yahweh. And so we can always go to him to find what we need.
Now, you suggest in your book that God invites us to tell him our needs. So, do we confuse our wants and our needs? Are they two different things?
Oh, I think we easily confuse those things again, because we're finite and we're not, I was going to say, not as smart as we think we are sometimes, but the needs and the wants, two different things. So the things that we really need, those are the things we need for life. The things that we want, we can do without. I learned that when we moved on to a sailboat. It's been 6.5 years. And at first I thought, when I purged my earthly belongings, how will I get by without that nice mattress on my bed? Or
Yeah,
how
you
will
have
I
to be a
get
little
by
bit of a
without that?
minimalist, I would think, to live
Yeah,
on a
yeah.
sailboat, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? I don't feel like I'm really lacking anything. I can have joy without those things that I thought that I needed, but it turns out that they were wants.
Yeah, interesting. Now, you finish your book talking about the supremacy rather, of God. So, what does it mean to fear the Lord, and what does this look like today?
Yeah. Again, that would be the name Elion. I've mentioned that before, but in our translation in the Bible, we see it as Most High God, or God Most High, depending on the translation that you read. And it's like we can go back to the book of Isaiah, where the prophet just had this vision of God, and he fell on his face. He said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God," and that is that whole vision of El Elyon. There is no other God who is higher. He is the Most High God. That's why even in the Ten Commandments, he said, "You shall have no other God before me." It's because there is no other God who is higher than he is. He is the supreme God. He is the boss, and he has final say.
Hmm. It looks like we're running out of time here, but Grace, thanks so much for being with us today. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you for having me.
Grace Fox is the author of The Names of God, Living Unafraid. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.